Mono Sanbonani, hello, how's it? Good evening, Goeienaand, and Shalom. Welcome to it. It's another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. Hey, tada! You know what it is. Every time it's a Wednesday at 7 p.m., that means your favorite fat boy, Sihle Gobese, Big Daddy Liberty, is on your screens. Welcome to it. I hope you're keeping warm as the country endures the what seems to be the remnants, perhaps, of quite a few cold fronts. But I've always said these cold fronts are not colder than the hearts of ANC politicians. So we're quite fine, dear South Africans. Welcome to it if you're just joining. Remember, your only price of admission is hitting that like button and sharing this link. I have a very interesting conversation tonight. I'm not going to waffle away, except to just about introduce my guest. I have in the house, of course, the CEO-elect of the Institute of Race Relations. But before I get to him, just a few housekeeping rules. A reminder, please, to the moderators on the various platforms, actually on just YouTube. Keep it classy and let's kick out the trolls and bigots. Definitely not a space for them on here. A reminder to you, I'm currently in Cape Town, and we are on the ground at the moment doing some excellent work. At the moment, I'm actually in Philippi. Super dangerous, but some interesting and awesome people I've been meeting in that part of the world, sharing with them the ideas around liberty. And, I've been testing a few pilot initiatives, which I'm looking to launch around the same time as the local government elections, around infusing the ideas that I often stand for in those very communities, people who perhaps don't watch the show. So we're busy with that at the moment. And the other thing is we're shooting a special, cataloging the effects of the lockdown on the tourism industry, tourism and entertainment industry in particular, because these are the sort of sectors that really do absorb the large unemployed, and even, as some economists have argued, unemployable individuals. But these are also the two sectors, that is entertainment, hospitality, that have been hardest hit by the lockdown. So we're shooting that at the moment, lots of filming in the remainder of this week and in this week, and hopefully in the following week we'll release that special on the effects of the lockdown, bringing you real stories on the Big Daddy Liberty Show. And if you saw a post I did earlier today, as I'm busy in the background just planning the shoots, organizing people who will be interviewed, a message that was sent to me. I won't share it, and I won't share who it's from, but it was somewhere along the lines of, the one participant who I might see is going through a really tough time. And there's something particularly said in that message which really got to me, because it told the story of how this lockdown and the poverty that it has thrust on millions of South Africans is rendering a lot of South Africans not only paupers, but it's bringing on a sense of, these are ordinary folk who, on an ordinary basis, are hardworking. They ask for nothing. They ask for nothing from anybody because they believe that they're going to work and earn their way through life. It's that faith, flag, family, and freedom type South African who I like to talk about. And it's that South African who has been relegated to absolute grinding poverty. People who before thought they were okay, they can weather any storm, but simply could not have foreseen the truly crippling nature of what has been a political decision. Lockdowns are not because of COVID-19. They are a political decision. And it is that decision that's thrust these people into poverty. And it brings a sense of, in this person's case, just an embarrassment and a shame in people who before were able to look after themselves, suddenly being relegated to becoming the dependents they never thought they'd ever be. And that got to me. That really got to me when I saw this particular message. So I'm going to bring you those stories, real everyday stories, in that particular special that I'm talking about. So look forward to that. It'll be in about 2 weeks. And speaking about looking forward to a conversation, here's a chap who we've had on the show before. Looking forward to hear from him. I'm talking, of course, about the CEO-elect of the Institute of Race Relations. There he is on screen, John Endres. John, good evening and welcome to the Big Daddy Liberty Show.
It's good to be back, Sihle. Thank you for inviting me. Really happy to be here.
Very good to have you, man. And let's perhaps hop into it, because anybody who's read the descriptor, the title of this video, knows I'm about to go in on BEE on the show. But there's more to this conversation. Okay, there we go. I'm back. We just had a little glitch there, but anyway, I just think the conversation is anchored on what happened in this country 2 weeks ago with the scenes, John, that we saw of rampant looting, a wanton disregard for the rule of law, and public violence, really, destruction of property. But what's been your take, just before we get into the main topic, but what's been your take on what we saw happening at that time in the country?
Well, I think there's been a lot of debate about whether what we saw was an insurrection, an attempt to overthrow the government, or lawlessness, looting, rioting, unrest. And I think in reality, it's a combination of those things. But as somebody pointed out on Twitter, there is a common element to all of these interpretations, and that element is actually the ANC. So if it was an insurrection, if it was the RET faction, if it was Zuma supporters creating violence and the conditions for violence, or the many desperate people who went out looting, they are all in effect linked by ANC governance. And I think that is an aspect we shouldn't lose sight of or lose track of, because that really was very, very important. I'd also like to mention a point you made earlier, Sihle, about pride. It's only occurred to me now that I think many of the people who went looting weren't proud to do it. And I think maybe also, apart from the poverty and the lack of prospects, being cold, being hungry at home, sitting there, you also don't feel pride if you haven't got a job. And that is really one of the devastating consequences of having economic policies that have created these sky-high levels of unemployment that we've got.
Absolutely. And perhaps that's the story of tonight, isn't it? It's the idea that the events of those 2 weeks, of 2 weeks ago, the looting and the like, it wasn't just a flash in the pan, no one saw it coming type event, which is obviously how right now the political elites are trying to spin this. Like, oh, we didn't see this coming, they'll say. And one faction will say, well, hang on, we sent you the intelligence telling you this is coming. And then a certain asshat minister said, oh, no, I didn't get that intelligence, blah, blah, blah. I can go down the line in terms of the absolutely clown world situation that this thing has devolved into. But organizations like yours have actually been saying this for years now, that the markers of something like this are developing. And at the heart of it, John, has been the bad policy and bad governance.
Yeah, there's one stat we track, for example, which is the number of protests in South Africa that occur during any given year, and also the share of those protests which are violent. And what we've seen is a steep increase in both numbers. So both the absolute number of protests that take place across South Africa, as many every day, and as a share of all the protests, the share that are violent has increased from about 10%, 10, 15 years ago to 30% now. And that curve tracks pretty accurately the decline in living standards. So you'll see that during the first, say, 10, 15 years after the transition, living standards were improving and protests were sort of simmering along at quite a low level. And then growth stopped, stagnation started, per capita incomes went down. We didn't create jobs in the economy. And as that happened, you could see the protests taking off. And just from reading those numbers, your expectation would have been that at some point in the future, there was going to be a blow up, because this is a trend that's been gathering pace over time. And I think you're also right in saying that this is not a once-off event. So I think we're all taken aback by the violence and the scale of it. And it really was awful to behold. But I don't think we're out of the woods yet. And I think we must really expect something like this to happen again. Also, if you consider the SASRIA, which is the state insurance company that insures companies against the risk of riots and unrest, is going to have to spend all of its money, plus some additional money, probably from the government, to pay out insurance claims to businesses whose premises and goods were destroyed. After they've paid all that money out, their coffers are going to be empty.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have to think about a new event happening at some stage in the future, which is very likely. There will be no money left. And what will happen then is that effectively the state will have to bail Sasri out again, just give a capital injection. But it's not a sustainable trajectory. And we just see these burdens being increased on the state finances, sometimes voluntarily, like, for example, the extension of the social grants, the public sector wage increases, and all sorts of other things that are really increasing to the state's cost burden and increasing the fiscal squeeze.
Mm. And John, you said it earlier on, and this is where we're going to sort of zoom in now. At the heart of it all, at the center of it all, and the part which often there's a concerted effort to dribble and distract us away from focusing on it, is the African National Congress, and really the ideas around the ANC, which aren't just the sole preserve of the ANC. There are a lot of political formations in this country who are in that ANC universe of ideas, whether it's the race nationalism that is a state, a society that picks winners and losers by race, or a leftist ideology, the idea that the state should be the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-bearing, and decider of all things in society. These are the two components that really dominate our politics in this country. And from that are the policy ideas, the trash, bad policy ideas that I often talk about. Let's zoom in on some of these, because I think they form the basis of people understanding why we're here and why your proposals that we'll talk about in the second half of the show in a moment actually break the cycle of those bad ideas. So it's really a bad ideas, bad policies versus the good ideas that we'll hear shortly. But let's talk about some of these bad ideas, John, because, in economics, we talk a lot about enabling opportunities as being critical to the success of any society: good healthcare, good education, safety, and security. Let's focus on these three areas broadly. And then we'll zoom in on some of the other policies associated with it that give it the racial tinge, as is often the case in South Africa. So on education, terrible outcomes. You guys did some excellent work looking at some of the dropout rates, for example, in education, the quality of education. Do you want to maybe just talk to us on just those three areas: education, safety and security, and healthcare, and of course the racial policies that edify all of this, such as BEE?
Well, ultimately, there are no quick fixes to the problems that we find ourselves in. And I think the hope or expectation that lawlessness can be addressed through increasing the strength of the police force or the prosecuting authorities, I think, is not going to work. Because ultimately what needs to happen is that more people need to see prospects for themselves. They need to they need to see ways for themselves to get out of poverty. And that requires the right growth policies. And if you think about the current growth policies, the economic growth policy is based on the idea of expropriation without compensation, which is, on the face of it, a ludicrous notion. The labor market policy, in the face of over 70% youth unemployment, is based on increasing the minimum wage, which prices more youngsters out of the market. And we see all these counterproductive approaches that really aren't going to help to solve the problems. And then if you add into that the enablers that you just mentioned, like education, for example, there the outcomes we are producing are also really, really bad. One of the statistics we've been tracking for many years at the Institute of Race Relations is the share of children in a cohort. So given from a certain starting year, say 2007, how many of those kids come through to 2019, make it to matric, pass matric, and then also get, say, a grade of 50% or higher on maths. And that number is about 5%, 4% or 5%.
Oh.
So our education system is really failing the children, and it is locking them out of future opportunities in the labor market. If you look at the employment stats by education, you can see that the more education you've got, the better your chances are to get a job. If you've got a tertiary education, you're in a much better position than if you dropped out, in 10th grade or something like that. So that is one of the things we really have to address. Then crime and safety, as the past weeks showed, are in a terrible state. We are used to an ongoing very high level of crime. We have one of the world's worst murder rates. We have high rates of crime against property, of theft, of burglaries, of housebreaking, and so on, which have been high for so long, I think, that we don't even notice it anymore. We track crime in the suburb where I stay on a database. There's 2 or 3 incidents each week, which I thought was normal until I told a friend overseas, and she said, "Oh, that's unbelievable! 2 or 3 incidents per week in a small area. That's crazy." And so this is, a very, very bad outcome. It's something that affects South Africans across all lines. It's not just something that's in the suburbs. It's in the townships. It's in the city centers. It's out in the rural areas. It's a huge problem. And of course, the effect of this is that businesses don't really want to invest for the long term, or if they do, they need to spend extra money in order to secure their assets. And it makes the whole proposition very unattractive. If you're a business owner at the moment in KZN whose business got looted or burnt down to the ground, you're really going to think about whether you're going to rebuild that, because what guarantee do you have that that's not going to happen again? And you don't have a guarantee. You might arm yourself, you might buy more insurance, but you're still facing that risk to your personal life as well.
Absolutely. And then just before we continue the conversation, welcome to it. This is the Big Daddy Liberty Show. We're just past the halfway mark. I'm in conversation with the CEO-elect of the Institute of Race Relations, that's John Endres. Hey guys, remember, hit that like button. There's about 260 of us and rising who are watching, but only 90 likes. Let's keep that engagement over 50%. It helps get the show out. John, we're going to start tapering the conversation into, I think, that the mainstay. You've ably painted that picture of the policy environment and really the foundations of the bad policy, the education, the lack of safety and security. But there's always a racial element to it in this country, unfortunately, given the race nationalism that has always characterized South African politics from the apartheid days, colonialism, and right through to today. We've always had one iteration of race nationalist to another. In our case, the ideas of race nationalism have serious real-world effects. 2 policies come to mind in this particular instance. You spoke, for example, about the reluctance of business to look to reinvest. In that particular case, in the KZN example, but that also speaks to the broader South Africa. There is a growing reluctance to invest in South Africa because of the high cost of doing business. And some of these race-based laws are exactly those high costs. Do you want to talk to us about how crippling BEE has been?
Now, I'd like to start on that topic maybe by saying that when BE began to be introduced, you could see that it was done with good intentions. I think the intention was to say, look, we've got the whites who were the oppressors during apartheid. They're clearly much wealthier than the black population is in South Africa, as well as the Indian and colored population, of course. We need to do something about this. This isn't a great state of affairs. So, let's fix it. And the approach chosen was to say, let's stick to those racial groups. And then, just put the finger on the scale somewhere, say for the black population group, to make them, more able to compete and climb up the rungs, hopefully overtake the whites, and then, we'd be a prosperous and great country. But I think after a quarter century, the results are in. We can see what the effects of those policies have been, and we can see that they didn't work. And I think it is time to take honest stock of that fact and say, we had a certain intention. The means we used to achieve that goal didn't achieve the goal. It is time to do something different. And this is less controversial than it was in the past to say, I think, but it is still controversial. I know that for many people, this is an attack on a very sincerely held and fundamental belief that you must have race-based policies in order to create the equality or something closer to equality in outcomes. But I think, you have to look at the facts and say, if you want to achieve that goal and this isn't doing it, then do something else. Change tack, find a better way of doing it. And that is what we've been thinking about a lot at the Institute of Race Relations, because ultimately what we want is a society that is prosperous and where people have got prospects for themselves, for their families. And if they compare themselves with themselves 10 years previously, they can see the progress they've made. And this isn't happening at the moment in South Africa. Most people, if they look at themselves 10 years ago, they haven't moved forward, but sometimes they've moved backwards in many cases.
Absolutely. And I want to add numbers to this because obviously this stems from a piece that you wrote this week, which is absolutely fantastic. And I want to just cite from it just to guide our conversation. Because the point you just made now is actually a critically important one. Often people hold on to what they know and judge policies by the intention and not the outcomes, even though the outcomes are absolutely terrible. And we all do this. But unfortunately, the proponents of BEE and race-based policy are really prone to this. In your piece, you said almost half the adult population, that's 49.2%, fall below the poverty line. That's set at 1,183 Rand per month. That's around $2 a day for the American viewers. And far from reducing inequality, government policies such as BEE, what we're discussing now, have created a small Black wealthy elite and a very large poor, jobless, and mostly Black underclass. Now, the results of this have been that inequality within the Black group itself now outstrips that between it and any other population, group. And there's one point you made as we zoom in on BEE, which is often the proponents of BEE, those who support BEE, will tell us that it is that small wealthy elite that it's created, which is proof that the policy works. John, that's not an argument we can take seriously, can we?
Well, I think partly it's an argument from self-interest, because I think most of the people who do support BEE are within that small group of people who have benefited. Right. And so for them, the evidence is clear. BEE works. BEE is what helped me get my job in the media company or the corporate or in government, and therefore it is a good policy. But in making this analysis, really, I think that people are looking away from what we think is 85% of the population, the Black population, that are not benefiting. And what we are saying is that you have to stop looking only at the 15% who are doing pretty well out of BEE, who would probably also do well without BEE because they have the qualifications, they've got the connections, they've got the experience, they're in a good position. In a normal job market, they would be okay. But the 85% are not okay. And these BEE policies are making it more difficult for them to break into the labor market and to find a way to progress and make their way up in life.
Absolutely. John, we are running out of time, but I want us to look at the alternative then, because often we're accused as, oh, well, you guys, you always complain about the stuff and, you always diagnose it. It's diagnosis drama. We know the stuff now, but what do we do is often the question we ask. And not only what do we do from rebuilding from the looting, the public violence, but also what do we do given the past 27 years of bad policy intervention? What changes this? The Institute of Race Relations speaks a lot about the economic empowerment for the disadvantaged, or the EED, not BEE, but EED. What's that all about? Are you just not going through another BEE, John?
Well, I mean, you could make the argument that we would be better off if we just scrap BEE and replaced it with nothing. That would have been the answer to somebody who says, if you scrap apartheid, what are you going to replace it with? You say, well, just don't replace it with anything. You don't need it. It's a bad policy. And that is true for BEE as well. But nonetheless, we do have a policy proposal called EED, as you say, and it has two legs. The one leg says you must incentivize companies not for transformation. You must incentivize them for directly doing the things that grow the economy. That is investing in the company, investing in people, creating jobs, boosting exports for the taxes they pay. Give them points for doing these things which you really need them to do to grow the economy. That's the one leg. And the other leg says there are many people in South Africa at the moment who are being badly served by government services in education, in healthcare, in housing. And partly the reason is because the bureaucracy we have administering these services is very inefficient and very, very corrupt. And so what our proposal says is that you take, for example, the education budget, and then you break it down. Say if there's 1,000 people in the country who need education, you divide the education budget by 1,000, and you give each of those people a voucher that entitles them to 1,000th of that amount. And you tell them you can take this anywhere to pay for education. You can go to a state school, you can go to a private school. The choice is yours. You face no limitations in terms of geography, in terms of type of institution, as long as it produces good outcomes. You as the parent choose. And the effect of this, we think, would be that it would feed the good schools, because they would be, parents would be clamoring to give their vouchers to that good school. But say,
That's right.
these guys, they've got great facilities, they paint the roof of the school, they get the best teachers, they really care about the children, they're not corrupt, and so on. I want my child to be at that school, and these schools will grow. Whereas the other schools where the teachers are only in class, for 2 hours per day, where the facilities are falling apart, where the principals don't take an interest, nobody will send their children to those schools. And that means those schools won't get funding, because those vouchers won't arrive at their door. And what will happen is that the bad schools will have to close down eventually, or get their act together and improve.
That's right.
And they will start competing with each other to get better than the next school, and to attract the parents and those vouchers, those valuable vouchers. And our polling shows that many South Africans really like this idea. If you ask them, would you like a voucher that you can spend anywhere you like on education? Many people say this is a great idea. I would love to do that. And what it also does is that it cuts out much of the bureaucracy. So instead of having, education departments, officials and boards and inspectors and that whole panoply of officialdom, you say, parents, take your money where it does the most good. You are then in the best position to evaluate that, and you can cut out the middleman. And I think that would work very well. You can do the same thing for healthcare, and you can do the same thing for housing as well. You can do it on a means-tested basis. You can say, if you earn below a certain amount, you qualify for these vouchers. You can also tell companies, if you want to earn brownie points for your good work, you can boost those vouchers. Tell your employees, if you're on one of those vouchers, we will double it for you. And then you, as the company, get points for that. And we think if you did these sorts of things, if you set the right incentives, you would very quickly see the results.
Absolutely. And again, as we, maybe a final point, because we quite literally have run out of time, but this is important to flesh out a bit more, because I'm watching the comment section and people are saying, yes, 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 we need these sort of ideas. At the heart of this idea, John, is two things that I really like and I want you to speak on. Number one, it's focused on the individual. It actually pays attention to the person who matters, not the state official, not the government employee, not the politician, but actually the individual who uses and wants that opportunity, that service. And of course, we talk a lot about the individual, but really, we're a family society. So it's the family that becomes the greatest beneficiary. That's the one thing I like about it. The second thing, of course, is, it introduces the idea that the market, the very thing that you and I in the middle class enjoy the benefits of, and often the poor are locked out, it actually pushes the market and its ability to provide quality services to the very poor people who've been locked out of it. And actually, there's a third. I want to add a third that you can speak to in your closing remarks. It removes race as the definer of who gets opportunity and who doesn't, and actually says, instead of race, let's look at need. You're disadvantaged. The currently disadvantaged are at the front of the queue are receiving help. And if you don't need help in this society, then the state doesn't bother with you. You have the freedom, the liberty to pursue your happiness and your own opportunities. Have I characterized those three things properly, John?
Yeah, these are great points, Sichle. The first one, I think I would like to add the word subsidiarity, which is a philosophical concept that says that decisions should be made at the lowest possible level. Absolutely. And if there are decisions you can let individuals make at the family level, that's best. If you compare, for example, say food parcels with SASSA vouchers, you see the difference in these approaches, because SASSA vouchers or cards are like a voucher. Food parcels, your officials, your ANC people will hand out in return for votes and to buy off the electorate. With SASSA cards, they can't do it because the money goes directly onto the card. There's nobody in between. So they can't use them to influence people's votes or the way people think. That's why that's a really good approach. Your second point on markets is also a really good one. As you point out, middle-class people often have the choice of using state services or private services, and usually opt for private services. If you're poor, you don't have that choice. You can only choose government services. But with the voucher system, you would have the choice, because you could spend those vouchers either at a private facility or a government facility. There's actually no reason why government facilities shouldn't be good. They can be good, but they need the right incentives, and they need to receive the signals from the market on being rewarded when they're doing well and being punished when they're doing badly. This is what's currently not happening. And your third point on race, absolutely. I think our polling shows that South Africans actually do get along pretty well, much better than politicians would think. Racism is not a huge problem, actually, but race-based policies sort of perpetuate it and feed it and make it work and keep it alive. And so if you could take race out of government policies and just say, look, what it's really about is social progress. It's about getting people to have a chance in life, to make the best of their life. Everybody starts out different, that's something you can't really help, but you really do want to give each person a crack, give them an opportunity to make the best of their lives. And race shouldn't be a factor in that. It should just be based on achieving the greatest social progress that you can across the board, no matter which group it applies to.
Absolutely. That is, of course, John Endres, the CEO-elect at the Institute of Race Relations. I must confess, and those of you who know the show, I have a very close working relationship with the IRR, and I hope it's one which will continue, because it's these ideas that I take with me into communities. And now you're getting a stronger sense of the intellectual base that I draw from. And it's organizations like the IRR, that I do exactly that from. John, thank you very much. Very quickly, what will you be looking at this, how do we find these ideas and more? Is it on the Daily Friend, on the website? How do we find this?
Yes, if you want the really detailed reports, you would go to irr.org.za and to the reports section. And there you'll see really sort of quite academic stuff and long reports and so on if you really want the detail. But most of these ideas we disseminate through many other channels. One of them is the Daily Friend. You'll get news stories that really interpret events in the country through these lenses. You can also follow the CRA, the Center for Risk Analysis, for a more business-oriented analysis, as well as, of course, your channel, and also Two Crickets and a Thorn Tree, another very good podcast run by Gabriel Krause and Nicholas Lorimer.
Absolutely. John, thank you very much. That's John Endres, the CEO-elect at the Institute of Race Relations. A big thank you to him, and a big thank you to you for watching. Again, this show is always just a quick 30-minute show, and super appreciate it. I hope you liked today's topic. I just thought, hey man, let's get some of these ideas out, a refresher on what are some of the ideas that I stand for, so that you get a strong sense of what my advocacy work is in communities across this country. When I talk about, for example, looking to launch a Mazakele campaign, Mazakele being a Zulu word for build it yourself, it is these ideas that form the basis of the EED, for example, economic empowerment for the disadvantaged, are some of the ideas that I push into communities around the country as I travel around the country. So your support is facilitating this, getting me into communities to push these sort of ideas. Speaking about support, shout out to you, Leo for Mark, for the 35 Rand super sticker. I appreciate you, homie. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. And earlier on, if I can just quickly find it. Oh dear, it's all right, I can't get to it, but I did see the 100% super chat that came through. I'm sorry, I can't get to the actual tag over here. I do appreciate that support. With that being said, thank you so much for watching. This has been another episode of the Big Daddy Liberty Show. I will see you this Sunday for another episode of Liberty and Friends. The panel that I'll have on that one will be a electrifying one. So make sure you join us for that. Some very, very interesting minds on that. And I'm hoping maybe I can actually have John back on for this Sunday's Liberty and Friends, so as to unpack these ideas in greater detail. So with that being said, thanks for watching. I'll see you on Sunday for Liberty and Friends. This has been another episode of BDL Show. And remember, never trust a commie.